Good game.
Yeah, well, it's pretty close.
Well, I mean, I did table you in turn 2.
Yeah, well, we've been playing on the same board for months. You have the home field advantage.
Well, I built and painted all this terrain, so if you want something different, you're welcome to do it yourself.
You know what? I will.
Are you gonna help clean up?
I find terrain to be one of the most difficult parts of the hobby because it both matters in terms of gameplay, and it's another thing on top of hundreds of things in the way of getting games in. I've played games with gorgeous, perfectly painted terrain, and games with water bottles, cardboard boxes, and cans of smooth-tasting Pabst Blue Ribbon, and they were all just as fun. It often feels like the terrain doesn't matter. This was especially true in previous edition where terrain was just part of the landscape, with a couple of rules here and there. But it seems that Games Workshop is trying to make terrain come alive. Both in 9th edition 40k and the new Kill Team, they've added a whole host of new terrain rules that allow for strategic advantages and disadvantages. They've created terrain traits like heavy, light, traversable, barricades, and it's an opportunity to discuss with your opponent about the kill zone to make sure both players understand the lay of the land. But now that it's so important, it's hard to know what to build. What should my board look like? There are many examples online of beautiful boards and a whole host of companies and people on Etsy selling 3D prints of the terrain. But I found that although really cool, I would consider many of them generic sci-fi. The terrain would fit into many different games aesthetically, but I want the curtains to match the drapes. I want my terrain to fit the world from the get-go, and I don't want to buy the expensive Games Workshop terrain. This means, besides many hours of research and looking up companies, we are generally left to our own devices, but that gives us the opportunity to figure it out for ourselves. And I think I know the perfect place to look. To me, the big draw to wargaming, besides all the cool kids were doing it, is my love of RTS base building games. Spend resources, build buildings, and destroy your enemy. Wargaming always felt like RTS games in slow motion, with more turns. My first intro to these kinds of games was Red Alert 2. I don't know if this pre-9/11 artwork is real or not, my OG box doesn't have it, but there is a mission where you blow up the Pentagon and another mission where you take control of the World Trade Center. Red Alert 2 was awkwardly ahead of its time coming out in 2000, and probably is also part of the grand conspiracy. But I mostly played skirmish matches against Russians online. I also never won. Later, I was introduced to StarCraft 2 Wings of Liberty. This is when Blizzard was an innocent company with no troubles at all. No troubles at all.
No troubles at all.
I was always at the top of Bronze League, and once at the very bottom of Silver. I sucked, but I also loved these games. I played StarCraft so much I had dreams of it at night. But there was one RTS game that I missed, and that was Dawn of War 1. I played it for the first time in 2014, with Jay showing me the ropes. What separates this game from the rest I've played is capturing objectives. The games don't necessarily have to be a giant bloodbath. You just have to protect your objectives, which is a neat way of tying the video game into the 40k tabletop game. There is also Dawn of War 2, which is also very fun, but it doesn't have any base building, so it's not for me. And of course, how could we forget about Dawn of War 3? Everyone's favorite game. Just kidding, no one cares. This game was released in 2014, arguably at the downfall of the base building RTS games. It's also really clunky, but the official Dawn of War 3 forum is pretty hilarious with people pissed that no one plays the game anymore. But getting back to Dawn of War 1. One of my favorite parts of the game are these buildings. Every army has some cool stuff, and even though I'm a big fan of the Xenos armies, to me the epitome of Dawn of War 1 is the Space Marine plasma generators and the Stronghold. These two buildings have inspired me to connect my love of RTS games and war games together. To do this, I'm going to build a Kill Team board inspired by Dawn of War 1, with the Space Marines plasma generator and Stronghold. I'm going to start by taking the standard Kill Team board and play with the placement of buildings, using paper. This is going to help me figure out what I need to make to fill up space. This is also when I need to start thinking about the different terrain types and apply them to my paper cutouts. I can do some rough estimating with how big everything will be and how many of each different type of terrain I want. I really want 4 plasma generators, but to build them identically out of plastic card or foam doesn't sound like very much fun. So I will turn to my old friend, the 3D printer, and my old job as a draftsman to get this board made. But if you want to build these buildings by hand, I'll give you some dimensions so you can build them at home. And if you're good, I'll even give you some STLs. Stay tuned till the end and I'll show you where to get them. But before we get modeling, it's time to create some sketch models. Sketch models allow you to experiment with designs without having to commit to expensive materials or jumping into 3D models on the computer without understanding scale. All I did was look at some screenshots I took of the buildings and tried to get as close as possible. When trying to get scale correct, it can be helpful to use reference points and lengths. Ever see arrogant dorky artists pull this move? They're trying to figure out how big an object is relative to the other objects around it. I can tell that because of the height of this stronghold, it's actually about 6 of its lengths long. Using the height as a scale helps me keep the proportions the same. Although that goes right out the window because I have to keep in mind the game and make sure the buildings are tall enough and not too big. This made me have to adjust the proportions a little bit to make the stronghold taller than it appears in the screenshots. Look at these sketch models. They look horrible, which is perfect. They only took about 2 hours to make and taught me everything I need to know in order to 3D model them. From here, I can simply measure the sketch models and make perfect versions on the computer. For this project, I'm going to use Vectorworks as my drafting program of choice, but similar results can be achieved in free programs like Fusion 360 or Blender. If you're a student, you can get a free version of Vectorworks with your class schedule or student ID. For now, the goal is to get down the general shapes of these buildings. It can sometimes be detrimental to jump into the detailing too quickly. I'm also correcting mistakes I made in the sketch models, like the length of the stronghold and how wide the plasma generator is. Now that I have the general shape, it's time to figure out how I want these 3D printed. I've had plenty of experience with both FDM, the filament machines, and resin machines. There is always this debate on which type of machine is better, but just like everything, it depends. FDM printers really excel at larger objects, and resin printers are great for smaller, highly detailed projects. That's why I'm going to try something new and use both types of printers in conjunction to create these buildings. The best of both worlds. For this project, Anycubic was nice enough to supply us with a Viper FDM printer and some PLA plastic, and the new unreleased Photon Ultra DLP resin printer, which I'm super excited to try out. If you're interested in these two printers, there's a link in the description to learn more about them. With these two printers working together, we should get great results. Once I had the basic shapes down, it was time to add details like grates, lights, and pipes. I designed these in a way so that they peg into the large structure of the PLA prints. They will print perfectly with resin without much cleanup. But as cool as these buildings are, it doesn't give us enough terrain to finish the table. I thought some small barricades would be interesting, and I designed them to look similar to the Stronghold, keeping the same design aesthetic. I thought they looked good, but were a little plain. So I had the idea of roughing them up in a little program called Blender. Blender is a free 3D modeling and sculpting software for the masses. Although free, it is powerful. I applied a remesh modifier to the model, which was exported out of Vectorworks as an STL. And it was time to get rough with it. I first applied a rust texture all over the barricade, and then used the clay strips brush to add damage. I also used the draw sharp brush to add stray bullet holes to the barricade. All of this worked out great, so I had an insane idea. Could I take the parts of the model I already made and build cover and scatter terrain out of them? I started by building clean versions of the models in Vectorworks that I will detail later in Blender. And I also made sure that these models would fit on the bed of the Photon Ultra. Again, I applied a remesh and went to town adding damage, rocks, and I installed brushes that allowed me to add texture. Like the buildings were rusted and covered in dirt and grime. And this was quick to do, just go around and play with the different brushes until the models look properly damaged. If you're looking to get into Blender, a project like this would be an easy way to get you familiar with the program. From here, it's time to print, and also see if my designs work. And it generally does, although I made plenty of mistakes along the way. But that's why the iterative design process is so important. Learn from your mistakes and try again. Your final design will be a lot better for it. After an iteration, I was also able to sneak in some modularity into the Stronghold so you can build it as just walls, the front half, back half, or both of them together depending on the board you want to create. These models printed perfectly on both printers. Before we paint, we need to make sure everything will fit, and although not completely necessary, I'm going to sand down the layer lines on the PLA prints. I used a similar method Jay used to prep his Warhammer 40k gun prop. Sanded just enough to make the layer lines less visible, gave it a coat of Bondo filler primer, and lastly, gave all the parts another sanding. This created a super smooth finish to the models. I then added all the resin parts to the terrain pieces, keeping them in place with some super glue. These super detailed resin prints are going to make the PLA prints look really great. My idea for this terrain is that the Space Marines have been on this planet for years and they keep getting attacked by the orcs. Now that everything is perfectly smooth, it's time to rough it up again, and the easiest way to do that is to use Tamiya's modeling putty and stipple it on with a sponge. I did this to every piece, keeping it towards the bottom. This will be perfect for the dry brushing I'll do later. I also used the putty to hide seams on the terrain pieces. Make sure you wear a respirator. I primed all the big prints with Rust-Oleum black primer, and I gave the scattered terrain pieces a coat of Stynylrez black primer through the airbrush. It's now time to add a little color. When Jay wasn't looking, I stole one of his kill team members, and I think it'd be super cool to have the terrain match his team. With a tap the paint, this plasma generator was green. Although I used up all my magic and had to do the rest with a brush. At this stage, I didn't know how to proceed. I was worried I was going to mess up all the terrain. So I decided to just go for it and paint one of the barricades, and this is how it ended up. Not great, a little bit of a mess, and the pigments aren't close to the board color, but it taught me everything I needed to know about how to move forward. There are so many terrain pieces to work on, but they're all painted almost exactly the same. I did a highlight coat of a tan green to the topmost parts of the models with a little bit of a gradient down the sides. Certain models have metal parts like the bottom of the plasma generators, vents of the Stronghold, as well as the drop pod hatch on top. They were all painted with Citadel lead belcher darkened with a little bit of black paint. And then the first step of weathering was in order. I sprayed a dark brown through my airbrush, hitting the vents like the fans and exhaust ports of the plasma generators, and I added this to the inside of the generators as well, creating a smoky brown char appearance. This effect was also added to all the holes, dents, and battle damage at the scatter terrain and barricades. But then it was time to go deeper. All these areas were sprayed again, but with a little black ink through the airbrush. The goal is to have a dark spot in the middle with a smoky brown radiating on the outside of the damage and exhaust ports. A unique feature of the plasma generators are these glowing cylinders. I first painted them a dark blue. For these 4, I did them by hand, but you could also use an airbrush for the base coat. Now I could layer and glaze on all these glowy bits, but what's the fun in that? I simply airbrushed a light blue right on, trying to keep the brightest portion right in the center of the cylinder. Quickly, that was followed by a white ink through the airbrush, keeping it more in the center. Another unique feature of these generators are the hazard stripes. I made a template in Vectorworks using the actual 3D model, so I knew it was going to be perfect. I cut out the template, glued it to some painter's tape, and then cut the tape to match the template. The tape can handle the abuse more than the paper. Now for painting, I did it 2 different ways. You can either paint the spot black, put on the template, and then do the hazards, which I first painted white and then a yellow so that the yellow would be bright, and then to add some visual interest, I added red ink to the sides. Or you could paint the white, yellow, and red first, and then paint on the hazards in black. I found that to be the fastest way, especially if you only have one airbrush. It's much easier to batch paint that way. I also did a similar thing to the scatter terrain, but I just hand painted the black stripes, because I'm going to do a bunch of weather on top of them anyways. Speaking of weathering, it's time for round 2. I took some sponge and put it into tweezers, and a pro tip is to use a rubber band to hold the tweezers together so you don't stress out your hand, because we're going to be weathering everything painted green with this. I applied a dark brown all over the models. I kept it mostly to the corners, but I also hit the large panels as well. With that, the last bit of texturing came to the dark metal parts of the model. I gave them a nice sloppy coat of Citadel Nuln Oil and used my pretty pink makeup brushes to apply a bright silver to those portions of the model. It really makes the surfaces look nice and scratched up, and the putty we applied earlier really sells the effect. I think I really unlocked an interesting effect that I'm going to have to use more often on my actual models. It's now time for some of the random other features on the terrain. Like I added a glowing effect to the inside of the plasma generators with a dark blue on both the inside of the legs and the top part of the base. I also splashed the glow to the sides of the legs for an added glowing effect. I did the same glow effect with the airbrush on the lights using a yellow paint. With that, the final step on the plasma generators and Stronghold is done. We're now in the home stretch. I painted the ground on all these pieces of scatter terrain with a brown, and I painted all the rocks of various different sizes with a dark gray. After that was dry, everything got hit with Nuln Oil, and after that, a dry brushing of tan was applied all over the scatter terrain. I did this to these pieces because I wanted them to look super dirty. These are the old parts of the generators in Stronghold that have seen many invasions and destruction. I like to think that the 4 plasma generators in Stronghold are more recent constructions, which is why they don't have any dust on them. I also did this dry brushing to the barricades because they've seen many a war as well. That was the final step, and it's now time to get in some games. I'm super excited to get battles in, and right on time for Octeris. It took a little over 25 hours of modeling work over a 1-month period of time to get the terrain all designed. A big thing I learned is to really appreciate the very nice terrain you can buy from Games Workshop. Look at this. This is one of the pieces of the terrain from Octeris, and when I look at this, I see so many decisions on what goes where, and what needs to fill in the gaps to make the production process possible. I really have a newfound appreciation for this terrain. I experienced similar design challenges because I can 3D model parts that would not print very well, just like they have to consider how they're going to make the molds. Although as easy as buying terrain is, 3D printing really has come a long way. It used to take forever to get a decent print with double checking settings and praying that you set up everything correctly. But these 2 printers are pretty much set and forget, especially the Viper because of the auto leveling bed. I haven't used a printer with that feature since I used the expensive $1,500 printers in college. The Ultra is also fantastic and made quick work of these terrain pieces because of the DLP projector. This allows for quick cure times of just 2 seconds or less. I'm still experimenting with how quick the Ultra can print, but the scatter terrain only took less than 2 hours per part. On my other machines, it could easily be double or triple that. I didn't have much trouble, and after using many different brands of printers, I can say these Anycubic machines are my favorite ones I've used. The quality is excellent, and I can't wait to design more models to print. Let us know what other terrain you'd like to see us make. Maybe some Tau or Eldar from Dawn of War 1. Now for all of you at home, if you're looking for the general plans or STLs for the plasma generator, those can be found on our Patreon page for free. I also made a simpler version of the generator that you can print with only the FDM machine. And if you complete the terrain, tag us in an Instagram post and submit it to our Discord server under our EOB Complete channel. We would love to take a look. And while on our Patreon page, maybe you'd consider becoming a member. Over there, you'll gain access to some behind the scenes, hobby hangouts, terrain STLs, and more exclusive content. Now, if you're interested in the Stronghold, barricades, and scatter terrain made in this video, those are up on our Patreon for the Ultra fans. Our goal is to make more terrain and models, and those STLs will be up for our higher tier patrons. I had a lot of fun making this kind of stuff, but now it's time for me to clean up. But for you, it's time for the real star of the show, this week's EOB Complete submissions.
We put out a challenge to our community to send us before and after photos of their recently finished models to be immortalized in our videos. If you want to join in the fun, you can submit a before and after photo of your painted mini to our Discord server, which you can find in the description below, or you can post it to Instagram with the hashtag EOBComplete. Without further ado, let's look at and get inspired by what the folks have finished this week. A Dark Angels Captain by Max Latina, an Imperial Guard Army by Joe Dracos, Gazgul Mag Uruk Thraka by Soggycat, some Necron Immortals by Digidueler, some Bully Grin by Just Make Stuff, an Age of Sigmar Yandrasta by Mania, an Adventurer by Brucifer, a Sister of Battle by Cold Shower, a Swamp Kala Shaman by JFK Space Race, an Onagar Dunecrawler by Platypus Duke, a Space Marine Chapter Master by TNT Gaming 285, an Angler Squig by Wombat 74, a Captain on Bike by Jacoby, a Space Marine Apothecary by Aldous, an Imperial Guard Company Commander by Bagpipeman, some Cruel Boys by Brook, a Plague Crawler by Love the M, an Infinity Andromeda by FreebooterzMerc, a Plague Marine with Plague Spewer by Muckle, a Space Marine Suppressor by Ender Skeperen, a Necron Warrior by P. Zemislaw, an Age of Sigmar Kragnos by SDV Miniatures, a Sister of Battle Paragon Warsuit by Rogel Dorn 01, a Goliath Fighter by Lex Killcannon, and an Imperial Guard Kel and Creed by Sexy Kaya. Congratulations to everyone for a job well done. It's no small feat to get paint on a mini, and you all should feel really proud. Nothing gets the hobby juices flowing like finishing a project, and we all thank you for sharing your work, motivating us and the hobby community to paint our plastic. Thanks for sharing.